I want to tell you something I have never said out loud in exactly this way before. Not to my daughters, not to my closest friend, not even to the therapist I eventually found when I was well into my 40s and finally living an English life with English words for things I had only ever felt in Pennsylvania Dutch. I want to tell you about the 7 months my husband refused to sleep beside me. And I want to tell you the reason, because the reason is the part that will stay with you. The reason is the part that changed everything I thought I understood about marriage, about faith, about silence, and about what a person carries alone when the community around them has decided that certain truths are not allowed to exist. My name is Hannah. I married Jonas when I was 19 years old. He was 26. He was tall and quiet in the way that certain Amish men are quiet. Not cold, not distant, but careful. Like a man who had learned early that words cost something, and so he spent them slowly. I had known him my whole life, the way you know everyone in a small community. I knew which family he came from. I knew his father had a good reputation with horses. I knew his mother made the best shoofly pie at every church Sunday, and that she pressed it into your hands with both of hers when she gave it to you. I knew Jonas by his outline, by his place in the community's shape. I did not know him as a person, not yet. That, I told myself, would come after. Before I go any further, I want to pause for just a moment and be honest with you. More than 90% of the people watching this right now have never subscribed to this channel. And I understand that. You found your way here somehow, maybe through another video, maybe through something a friend shared, maybe because something in the title caught the part of you that has always needed to know what really happens inside lives that look simple from the outside. But if this story is already sitting somewhere in your chest, if you are already leaning forward a little, please subscribe and turn on that notification bell. It is completely free, and it means the next story finds you instead of you having to go looking for it. And while you are here, I want to know something. Leave me a comment below and tell me this. What is the one memory you find yourself returning to over and over again? The one that never quite lets you go, no matter how many years pass over it. I read every single one. Now let me tell you about Jonas. We were married on a Thursday in late October. The leaves were down. The sky that morning was the particular gray that October makes in Ohio. Not stormy, not hopeless, just the quiet gray of a world settling into itself before winter. I wore a blue dress my mother had sewn. I had helped her with the hem. We had sat together at the kitchen table for 3 evenings doing the stitching, and she had talked about practical things the whole time, about keeping a clean kitchen, about managing a husband's moods by managing the temperature of a meal, about the importance of not drawing attention to yourself in front of the bishop's wife. She did not talk about love. She did not talk about loneliness. She did not talk about what to do if something felt wrong. I think she believed that if you did not name a thing, the thing could not happen. The ceremony was long. Jonas stood at the front, and I stood beside him, and we made our vows in front of God and the community, and the particular face my father made when he was doing his best to look proud of something he had arranged himself. Jonas's hand was dry and steady when he took mine. Mine was not. I noticed that. I noticed it, and I filed it away in the part of my mind where I kept all the things I was not supposed to notice. After the meal, after the singing, after my mother-in-law pulled me into a hug that smelled of coffee and wood smoke and something that might have been hope, we went to the house. Jonas's house. My house now. A white farmhouse with green shutters and a porch that needed one board replaced on the left side. I had been inside it twice before the wedding, both times with other people present. I had looked at the kitchen and thought about where I would put things. I had not thought about the bedroom. I had not let myself think about the bedroom, because that was the part I had no language for, only fear wearing the costume of acceptance. We went inside. Jonas lit the lamp. I stood in the kitchen in my wedding dress, and I did not know where to put my hands. Jonas put water on for tea. He moved around that kitchen with the ease of a man who had lived alone in it for 3 years and knew every shelf and every sound it made. I stood in the middle of it feeling like furniture that had been delivered to the wrong house. He poured the tea. He set mine in front of me. He sat across the table. And then he said something I was not prepared for. He said, "Hannah, I need to tell you something before this goes any further." And there was something in his voice, not cruelty, not coldness, something more careful than either of those things, something that sounded almost like grief. He said, "I need to ask something of you that I have no right to ask, and I need you to hear me before you decide what you think of me. I want you to stay with me right here, because this is the part where most people assume they already know what is coming. They think they know the reason. I am telling you now, they do not. I did not. I sat across from my husband of 6 hours in that kitchen that smelled of sawdust and dried herbs and the faint, particular cold of a house that has been heated only by one person's living, and I waited. And Jonas told me the thing he had been carrying alone for almost 4 years. He had been engaged before me. Her name was Miriam. She was from a district 2 counties away. They had courted for almost a year, which in our community was a long time. Long enough that the families had begun to speak to each other about arrangements. Long enough that Jonas had allowed himself to believe in the shape of the life ahead. And then Miriam had gotten sick. Not sick the way people get sick with fevers and remedies and recovery. Sick the way that changes the color of every room you walk into. She had been diagnosed by an English doctor in the city after her family finally accepted that the home treatments were not working. The diagnosis was a word Jonas said quietly into the kitchen air between us. And even though it was 1987 and I was 19, and I had grown up in a world that did not talk about such things, I understood the weight of that word. I understood what it meant for Miriam. I understood what it meant for Jonas. She died 11 months after the diagnosis. Jonas had not been allowed to visit her in the hospital. That is not the Amish way in all communities, but in his community, in that time, the bishop had counseled that the engagement was not yet a marriage, and that Jonas was not yet family, and that the hospital was an English place, and that grief should be carried privately and placed before God. So Jonas had carried it privately. He had placed it before God. And then, 2 years later, his parents and her parents and the community's quiet machinery had decided that a man of 25 with a farm and a good name needed a wife. And the name they had decided on was mine. He told me all of this without looking away, the lamp between us threw his shadow large against the kitchen wall. He said, "I want to be honest with you because I think you deserve honesty more than you deserve a performance." He said, "I do not know how to share a bed with someone yet. I do not know if I am able." He said, "I am asking you to give me time." And what he said next is the sentence I have turned over in my hands for more than 30 years since. He said, "I am not asking because I do not respect you. I am asking because I respect you enough to tell you the truth instead of pretending." I did not know what to do with that. I was 19 years old, and I had been prepared for many things on my wedding night. I had been prepared for awkwardness. I had been prepared for the mechanical, obligatory nature of what the older women had hinted at in careful, sideways language. I had been prepared for the weight of a new house and a new name and a new life pressing down all at once. I had not been prepared for honesty. I had not been prepared for a man who said, "Here is what is real inside me," and then waited. I told him yes. I told him I could wait. And I want to be honest with you too, the way Jonas was honest with me, because this story deserves honesty in its telling. I told him yes partly because I had no other language available to me. I told him yes partly because the alternative was to say no, and I did not know what no even meant, inside the walls of a community where you did not say no to the shape of your life. But I also told him yes, and this is the part I did not understand until much later, because something in the way he had spoken to me had done something I had not expected. It had made me feel, for the first time since the engagement was announced, like a person. Like a specific person with a specific interior life who had been recognized by someone as being actually present in the room. So Jonas slept in the small room off the kitchen that had been a sewing room. He had moved a cot in there before the wedding. I did not know that until he showed me. He had prepared this. He had thought it through and prepared it, and he had still gone through with the wedding because the farm needed a wife and his parents needed peace, and the community needed the shape of things to be correct. But he had also quietly, on his own, decided that he would not pretend with me. That was the gift inside the difficulty. That was the thing I did not have a name for until I was much older. He had decided that if he had to take part in a system that did not ask either of us what we actually wanted, he would at least be truthful inside it. The 7 months were strange. I will not pretend they were easy. I would be lying if I told you there were not mornings when I sat at that kitchen table after he had gone out to the barn and felt the particular loneliness of being in a house with someone who was kind to you and still somehow very far away. There were Sundays at church when I could feel the eyes of the older women on me, measuring something, and I would think about what they would say if they knew the cot in the sewing room. There were letters from my mother asking how I was settling in, and I would write back and say, "Fine, good, the garden is coming along." And I would fold those letters with both hands and feel the distance between what was true and what I was allowed to say growing wider every week. But there were also evenings, and the evenings were something different. Jonas was not a talker by nature, but he became one, slowly, with me, in that kitchen after supper with the lamp between us and the farm going quiet outside. He told me about Miriam, carefully and in pieces, the way you tell something that still has edges. He told me about the particular morning he had found out she was gone, how he had been mending a fence line and a younger boy had come running across the field, and he had known before the boy reached him. He had known from the way the boy was running. He told me about the grief that had no proper container in his world, no ritual for an almost husband, no language for a loss that the community did not officially recognize because the marriage had not yet happened. He said it was like losing something you were not allowed to admit you had owned. And I told him things too. I told him about the afternoon the engagement was announced and how I had gone into the root cellar alone afterward and sat on the dirt floor in the dark for a long time. I told him about the feeling of standing in that wedding ceremony with my voice doing what was required of it, while my real self stood somewhere behind my eyes, watching. He listened the way very few people in my life had ever listened, without preparing his response, without waiting for me to finish so he could redirect towards something more comfortable. He just listened, and when I stopped, he would sometimes say nothing at all for a while, and the silence was not empty. It was the kind of silence that means, I am still here, and I heard you. By the third month, I had stopped measuring the distance between us and started paying attention to what was actually there. By the fifth month, I realized I was looking forward to the evenings, not because I had fallen into some romantic feeling, though something softer than I expected had begun to grow quietly between us, but because Jonas had become the only person in my life who spoke to me as though my thoughts were worth hearing. In a world where women's inner lives were considered secondary to their function, that was not a small thing. That was, in fact, enormous. The 7 months ended on a night in late May. The windows were open. The farm smelled of turned earth and the first green things coming up. Jonas came in from a long day and sat down at the table, and he looked at me for a moment without saying anything, and then he said, I think I have been afraid that caring for someone again means losing them again. He said it simply, the way he said most things, like the thought had been sitting in him for a while, and he had decided it was time to let it out into the room. I said, I think that is probably true. He said, I think I am less afraid now than I was. I said, I think I am glad. And that was all. That was the whole conversation. We did not make declarations. We did not perform anything. We were two people who had spent 7 months becoming honest with each other in the quiet. And when the time came, we simply moved forward into the next part of things without ceremony, because the real ceremony had already happened, slowly, in the evenings, over tea, in a kitchen with a lamp between us. What Jonas and I had was not what I had been told marriage was supposed to be. It was not the submission and the structure and the carefully managed distance I had watched in my parents' marriage and the marriages around me. It was also not the romantic sweep of the English stories I would read years later when I had left the community and found a library and sat in it for hours, feeling like a person who had been handed back something she had not known was missing. What Jonas and I had was something quieter and more specific than either of those things. It was the result of two people who had both been placed inside a life without being asked, deciding together, privately, that they would be truthful inside it. That is a harder thing to name than romance, but I think it is more durable. I left the community when I was 27. Jonas and I had been married for 8 years by then, and the reasons I left are their own story for another time. What I will tell you is that Jonas knew before I did. He had watched me the way he watched most things, carefully and without judgment. And one evening he said, "You are getting smaller, Hannah." He did not mean my body. I knew what he meant. I said, "I know." He said, "I do not want you to get smaller." And that was the beginning of the ending of that part of my life, said quietly over tea in a kitchen where two people had learned to tell each other the truth. The shunning that followed I have spoken of in other videos. The letters returned, the doors that did not open, my mother's face the last time I saw it, the careful blankness she had learned to wear when something cost her too much to show. But Jonas, in his way, never fully disappeared. A letter twice a year, no return address, just my name in his handwriting, careful and unhurried, the way he did most things. He died 6 years ago. A farming accident, the way too many of the men from that world go. I found out from a neighbor who had kept a thread between us all those years. I cried for 4 days. Not because I was still in love with him in the way that word usually means, but because he had been the first person to ask me a real question and wait for the real answer. Because he had chosen honesty inside a system that did not require it and had not prepared him for it. Because the 7 months he had refused to sleep beside me had turned out to be the 7 months in which I had become, for the first time, fully known by another person. I have thought often about what those 7 months would have looked like if Jonas had been a different kind of man. If he had pushed through his grief and performed the expected thing, and we had begun our marriage the way the community expected. We would have been compliant. We would have looked correct from the outside. And I would have spent 8 years beside a stranger, instead of 8 years beside someone who had looked at me and said, "Here is what is true inside me," and waited to see if I could do the same. If you are somewhere right now, beside a person who has never asked you a real question, I see you. If you are carrying something that has no official container in the world you were raised in, I see you. If you have ever been given a life that fit the community's shape and wondered in the dark whether it fit yours, I see you. The grief that has no ritual is still grief. The love that has no ceremony is still love. The truth that the community decides not to name is still the truest thing in the room. Listen to it, even now, even quietly, even if no one else in the house can hear it yet. Before you leave, I want to thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this. I know there are so many places you could have been tonight, and you chose to be here, listening to something true. But I want to be honest with you about one more thing. More than 90% of the people who watch these videos still have not subscribed. And every time I think about that, I think about all the stories that might not reach the people who need them most. So if this story sat with you, if something in it felt familiar, if you heard something here that you have been waiting a long time to hear, please subscribe and turn on that notification bell. It is completely free, and it means you will be there when the next story comes. And before you go, I want to ask you something. Leave me a comment and tell me this. What part of this story stayed with you the longest? I read every single word you leave me, and I need you to know that. Until next time, remember this. The person who tells you the truth, inside a world that does not require it, is one of the rarest things you will ever be given. Hold that carefully if you find it.